All right, we'll say good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan. Cheshvan, Meir and Yitzchok. Meir and Rachel Gold in memory of Yonah, Tzvi, Ben Yosef, Chaim, Elazar, HaKohen, Zichron Levracha, and Noam Leah Efron in honor of and in celebration of the 98th birthday of Noam's grandfather, Yosef Hershel ben Mordechai Halevi. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, and Hashem will have an aliyah, and Emir Hashem, Noam's grandfather, will be zoche to celebrate many, many birthdays at Me'eh Ve'esrim Shanim Tovos. Also, a Baruch Haba to Moshe ben Sion Pacino, visiting us from Eretz Yisrael. So wonderful, wonderful to have you back. Baruch Haba. So with that, let us begin. So we have an incredible daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is daf Hey. We are picking up Emir Hashem on the bottom of Dalid Amud Beis. So remember again, we left off a little bit mid-sugya. So in the mid-sugya we left off with was as follows. We have a 5-way machlokes about the prohibition of Bal Ta'acher. Right? Remember, here's what we know. We know that halacha l'maisa, one is not permitted to go ahead and delay bringing a karban. The shaila is, or for that matter, again, it's not just karban. It's really with anything. It's really, at the end of the day, any obligation which you have upon you, one is not permitted to go ahead and delay. So the shaila that we're dealing with is how long or how much time must elapse in order to trigger the prohibition of Bal Ta'acher. So for that, we have a 5-way machlokes. A 5-way machlokes. So the Gemara says, remember, we then left off with the Gemara that said as follows, that we left off with a topic that said that halacha l'maisa, how do we know that atzeres, that Shavuos, has a tashlumin period, right? Ultimately, again, that after Shavuos, you have 7 days with which to go ahead and make up the karban. From where do we know that? So the Gemara quoted the pasuk, B'chag hamatzos, b'chag hashavuos, b'chag hasukos. And the Torah says that we are going ahead and comparing the Yom Tov of Shavuos to the Yom Tov of Pesach. Just like Pesach has 7 days, and therefore again there's tashlumin all 7 days, so too Shavuos has 7 days of tashlumin as well. So also we left off, the Gemara says, 2, 4, 5 lines in front of the bottom. Let's just pick up over here. Shmini regal bifnei atzmoi. The Gemara said, but 1 second. I'm sorry. So the Gemara says, why not go ahead and compare it? One more piece. Why not compare Shavuos to Sukkos? Just like Sukkos has 8 days. And therefore, again, go ahead and give tashlumin for 8 days to the Yom Tov of Shavuos, to which the Gemara says Sukkos doesn't have 8 days. Why? Because Shmini Atzeres is a regal bifnei atzmo. Shmini Atzeres is its own Yom Tov. To which the Gemara says, maybe we should say, so the Gemara says, Amor Darmina Shmini regal bifnei atzmo, Le'in Pizar Kishab. This is what we left off with. Yes, it's true, Shmini Atzeres is its own Yom Tov, but maybe we should say it's only its own Yom Tov in terms of Pizar Kishav. So we'll say, Rashi over here, last Rashi on the daf says, Pizar Kishav, we learned this back in Sukkah. Shmini Atzeres is a regal b'fnei atzmo in these 6 ways. Pious, it has its own lottery, that the Kohanim go ahead and do another lottery in order to determine who is going to do the avoda. Zman, it gets a shechianu. So Reish, regel, it's its own Yom Tov. Kuf, it gets its own karban. Shin, it gets its own shira. And ultimately, Beis, it gets its own bracha. That was talking about, again, the bracha that they used to go ahead and give the king. Avalein tashlumin, devri akal tashlumin the rishonu. So we'll say Shmini Atzeres occupies this fascinating spot in halacha, where on one hand, again, Shmini Atzeres is a regal bifnei atzmo. It is its own Yom Tov, as evidenced by Pizar Kishav, but also it is an extension of the Yom Tov of Sukkos. Why? Because at the end of the day, the Gemara says, if you were to not bring the karbanos of Sukkos over the course of Yom Tov, you would be permitted to go ahead and bring them on Shmini Atzeres. This not. Here we go. Mishalo Chag Yom Tov Harishon Shachag Chogeg Eskol Haregel V'Yom Tov Ha'acharon Shachag. Anyone who did not go ahead and offer up, let's say the Shalmi Chagiga, on the first day of Sukkos, has the ability to go ahead and offer up the Shalmi Chagiga over the duration of Sukkos and Shmini Atzeres. So as much as Shmini Atzeres is its own Yom Tiv, at the end of the day, it's connected to Sukkos. So therefore, both like going back to our original question, the pasuk says, "B'chag hamatzos, b'chag hashavos, b'chag hasukos." The Gemara wanted to say we're going to compare Shavuos to Pesach for what reason? Just like Pesach has 7 days of Tashlumin, 7 days over which you could offer up the karbanos of the day, so too Shavuos has 7 makeup days after the Yom Tov as well. To which the Gemara says, I don't understand, it's all the same pasuk. Instead of comparing it to Pesach, why don't you compare it to Sukkos and give it what? Give it what? An extra day. To which the Gemara says, Tafasta meruba lo tafasta, tafasta muat tafasta. So Rabbi said, literally, if you try to grab onto too much, you end up grabbing nothing at all. But if you grab a little bit, you could hold on to everything. Which Rabbi say is the way Chazal kind of codified the halachic concept, namely that when you have the ability to compare one thing to 2 other things, right? When you're making a comparison, so the idea would be to make the comparison to the less ambitious item, because the less ambitious item, if that's the right word, really less ambitious, is to the smaller item. Why? Because the larger item contains both the smaller item and the larger item. So, for example, to go ahead and if you have a choice between comparing it to Pesach and comparing it to Sukkos, so Sukkos includes Pesach as well. In other words, Sukkos is 8. So you know that 7 is the safe bet because both of the other Yomim Tovim have 7. So that's Tafasta Meruba Lo Tafasta, Tafasta Muat Tafasta. And therefore, again, we're going to compare it ultimately again to Pesach and not to Sukkos. We both say 2 pieces about this. Number one, we know in general the Pizar Kishav, we spoke about this back in Sukkah, that from a Shmini Atzeres perspective, we saw the sons of the Divrei Chaim says something so beautiful. He says, Pizar Kishav, those words are not just a mnemonic, they have a meaning as well. Pizar is like mifuzar, something that is scattered. Kshav means things, makshiv, things that you are listening to. So the sons of said something so beautiful. He explained that over the Yomim Noraim, there are so many messages and so many things that I'm focusing on that often, and the problem just is when there's so much, kind of like tafasta meruba lo tafasta, there's so much going on. Shmini Atzeres is the day for me to organize the scattered messages. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave me one additional regel, one additional Yom Tiv to be able to consolidate all of the profound messages of the season. That's Pizar, to take all that which is scattered and to go ahead and consolidate it. But the truth is, we can build on that a little bit, and that's not just the din. It's not just the din by Shmini Atzeres, right? It's a din ultimately in everyday life as well. We're pulled in so many different directions and involved in so many different things, and our head lives in so many different worlds. And often we have so many different dreams, goals, and aspirations. There's a lot of Pizar Kishav, right? There's a lot of scattered stuff, all good, all beautiful, all wonderful, but scattered. And if I don't take the time to consolidate, if I don't take the time to organize, if I don't take the time to take all of those great ideas, all of those haschalas, and somehow go ahead and organize them into a comprehensive life plan, I end up spinning my wheels throughout life. Not spinning my wheels with hate. I'll say that the reality is in life that a lot of times we spin our wheels with good things. We're involved in good things. We just don't have a plan to execute those good things. We just don't have a plan to advance those good things. They're all wonderful, but I'm living in Pizar Kishav. Life can become about Pizar Kishav. Got to take the time to consolidate, to go ahead and take all that which is scattered and to go ahead and consolidate it and craft it into a comprehensive life plan. Because Shmini Atzeres, Pizar Kishav, is a regel bifnei atzmo. It has to be a regel bifnei atzmo, but not just once a year. A regel bifnei atzmo each and every day. To take time to consolidate and create. Consolidate all of the ideas, all of the dreams, all the aspirations, and create a life plan for their execution. One last piece, and this is very important to go on record. Tafasta meruba lo tafasta, tafasta muat tafasta is a din in Gemara. It is not a din in life, right? In life, we live with tafasta meruba tafasta. Go big. We spoke about this on Shabbos. go big. Go big. There are many people who live life always going ahead and saying, tafasta muat, right? I'll reach for what I can grab and that's it. And the yesod in life is always to reach for something that's a little bit further than where you're holding right now, right? If all you reach for is that which is in arm's length, then at the end of the day, you don't really accomplish all that much. The goal in life is to push yourself just a little bit, to borrow the model from Basparo, right? From Bitya. What did Bitya Basparo do? She extended and she reached for something that was a little bit out of her reach. And Baruch, for the basket of Moshe Rabbeinu, Baruch Hashem, she did it because without her doing that, perhaps Klal Yisrael would have never had a Moshe Rabbeinu. You always have to reach a little bit further than what you think you can do. You always have to reach a little bit further out of your comfort zone. So tafasta meruba lo tafasta, tafasta muat tafasta works beautifully on Rosh Hashanah Daf Dalet Amud Beis. It does not work for life. For life, it has to be tafasta meruba. Go big, grab a lot, and in Meir Hashem you'll be zocha to tafasta. The Gemara goes weiter. Elamai hilchasa kasi rachmana lechag asukos. So I will say. So now it turns out that in this pasuk, right, which compares the three regalim, so ultimately we are comparing Shavuos to Pesach, but not comparing Shavuos to Sukkot. Okay, so at the end of the day, but yet they're all three mentioned in the same pasuk. So if you're going to tell me you're comparing Shavuos to Pesach, the teaching just like Pesach has 7 days of Tashlumin, so too Shavuos has 7 days of Tashlumin. So what does Sukkah bring to the table in this pasuk, right? What comparison can you glean between Sukkot and Shavuos? I'll tell you why. So the Gemara says, the Torah is coming to compare Sukkot to Pesach. How so? Top of Ham and Aleph. Ma chagamatzos ta'un lina. But it's very interesting. Just like on Pesach, you have to stay in Yerushalayim. Av chagasukos ta'un lina. So too on Sukkot, you have to stay in Yerushalayim. Now both say, now what does this mean you have to stay in Yerushalayim? This is very interesting. This is not talking about the night of Pesach. Obviously, the night of Pesach, you have to stay in Yerushalayim. Why? What are you doing the night of Pesach? You're eating Karban Pesach. This is talking about the first night of Chalamayid. That the first night, right, one day of Pesach, right, the first night of Chalamayid, which is the second night of Pesach, there is a din to stay in Yerushalayim. Look at Rashi. Ta'on lina leil cholol shamoed. First night of Chalamayid Pesach, there is a din of staying in Yerushalayim. So you celebrate the first day of Pesach in Yerushalayim. You think you're going home Matzah Yom Tiv, the first night of Chalamayid? No. You stay in Yerushalayim the first night of Chalamayid. So the Gemara says, just like you stay the first night of Chalamayid Pesach in Yerushalayim, so too there is a din of Lina to stay the first night of Chalamayid Sukkos in Yerushalayim as well. Right? It was a Halevi, we will be Zocha, Emir Hashem Bekarav. So the Gemara says, V'hasam Minalan, and how do we know that by Pesach? So there's an obligation of Lina on the first night of Chalamayid, the second night of Pesach. So I'll say, here we go. D'chsiv ufanisa baboker v'halachta la'alacha. The pasuk says, and you will wake up in the morning, and you'll go back to your tent. Or I should say, ufanisa baboker. You'll turn away in the morning and go back to your tent. Rashi says, ufanisa baboker biyam tov lo ka'amar kra shari hu yom shechiyuvo le'ra'os ba'azara. So we'll say this is fascinating. When the pasuk says, by the way, just the context over here, this is talking about, right? So when it says you'll get up in the morning, right? You'll turn away in the morning and go back to your tent. Go away in the morning, go back to your tent means you'll leave the Beis Hamikdash. You'll leave the Beis Hamikdash and go back home. The Gemara says that can't be referring to the first day of Pesach. Why can't it be referring to the first day of Pesach? Because they will say, what's the mitzvah on the first day of Pesach? Aliyah l'regel, Ri'iyas Pnei HaMikdash. Right, there's an obligation to be in the Beis HaMikdash on the first day of Pesach, on the first day of Yom Tiv. So therefore, when the pasuk says, Ufanisa baboker ve'alachto l'alecha, you could turn away from the Mikdash and go back home. By definition, that must be referring to what? Second day of Yom Tiv. The Tanakama Rabbi Shimon Elazar. So we'll say good. That finishes that piece. The Tanakama Rabbi Shimon Elazar. Tashlum Latzaras Minalahu. So we'll say the Tanakama. Remember, the Tanakama held that when are you in violation of Baal Ta'acher? after 3 regalim, right? But he doesn't require what? He doesn't require what? For it to be in order of Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkos. So the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon, right? Rabbi Shimon, it's not really Rabbi, it's just Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says that you require the 3 regalim, but you require them in order. So the Gemara says, Tashlumin la'atzeres minalahu. From where do they learn the idea that Shavuos has a 7-day makeup period after Yom Tiv? So nafkalu. Well, say by the way, I just want to mention. I think Moshe brought this up to me after shir yesterday. You know, we have a zecher to this practice, which is many have the minhag not to say tachnun for this. Right, Moshe, was that you who brought this up to me? Okay, I'm sorry. Said, okay, so all right, it was someone in the front over here. Right? This is the source of the minhag not to say tachnun for the 7 days after Shavuos. You know, both say it's interesting. No one ever questions minhagim not to say tachnun, right? They'll challenge every single other tenant in Yiddishkeit, right? Why do you have to do this? Why do this? When it comes to tachnun, okay, right? Everybody just like moves forward. So just if you ever were wondering why it is that sometimes we don't, there are different minhagim not to say tachnun 7 days after Shavuos, it's this. It's because the 7 days after Tashlumin, after Shavuos, were Tashlumin for the carbon of Shavuos. So the Gemara goes right there. So where do they learn out this concept from? Where do the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon learn this out from? So the Gemara says, Nafkalahu miditani Rabbi Bar Shmuel. They learn out from the following idea. The Tani Rabbi Bar Shmuel, Amra Torah, listen to this, Rabbi says, it's fascinating. Mana Yamim v'kidesh chodesh. So Rabbi said, listen to this. Count days and establish the new month. So I'll say, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Mani yamim, shnamar ad chodesh yamim, v'kidesh chodesh b'karbanos. So I'll say, listen to this. A month is established by a certain number of days and not by a certain number of hours. This is very important because even though when we bench Rosh Chodesh, we announce the Molad. Say the Molad for the month of Cheshvan is going to be on, Tuesday night, 12 o'clock and 4 Chalakim. So when it comes to the Molad, we announce date, time, and even number of hours, or number of Chalakim. When it comes to the counting of months are comprised of either 29 or 30 days. We don't take into account the number of hours. Look at Rashi, the Kidesh Chodesh, Bikarbanos, Ma Chodesh Kidusho Echa Miminuya Biyom Rosh Chodesh Shum Makrivin, Zman Ukvalam Echa Min Hayam, Shum Nibna Al Yadam. So we'll say, so the way the months are reckoned is by number of days. And the way you sanctify a month is how? By sanctifying one of those very units which made up the month, which is why we have Rosh Chodesh. And what is Rosh Chodesh? What is Rosh Chodesh? It's one unit of the unit, or 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, but one unit of the units which make up a month, and we sanctify one of those units, i.e. Rosh Chodesh, and in the Beis HaMikdash, you would bring specific karbanos for Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, we'll say, why is this important? So listen to this. So Amra Torah, Mana Yamim v'kidesh Chodesh, Mana Yamim v'kidesh Atzeres. So too again, when it comes to Shavuos, you have to go ahead and sanctify Shavuos by sanctifying one of its units. Now, I both say this is fascinating. Ultimately, at the end of the day, Ma Chodesh L'minuyav, Af Atzeres L'minuyav. Just like by the month, a month is made up of a bunch of individual units. We call them days. And when you go and you sanctify Rosh Chodesh, how do you sanctify Rosh Chodesh? How do you sanctify it? By sanctifying one of its units 1 day. So too, when we look at Shavuos, we look at the units of which Shavuos is made up of. We'll say, what is Shavuos made up of? Weeks. Sheva Shabbosos Timimos. Right? We count towards Shavuos by units of weeks. So too, when you sanctify Shavuos, what do you sanctify? A unit of time which made up the counting of Shavuos. What's a unit of time? A week. And therefore you see that Shavuos itself, the Yom Tov itself, is actually sanctified for a week. Now, it doesn't mean, of course, the Yom Tov is sanctified for a week, but what it does mean is the Yom Tov is a day, but then there is a week of time in which you could go ahead and bring the Karbanos HaChag. So let's say, if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says, Afat Seres, Havas Karbanosel, Be'echal Miminyona, V'hari Hi Nimnis Al Yidei Shavuim Shenemar, Sheva Shabbos Yonah. So we'll say, so a fascinating argument, or not an argument, fascinating idea. Just like a month is made up of units, and the sanctification of the month is the sanctification of one of those units, i.e. a day of Rosh Chodesh, that creates a paradigm. So too, Shavuos is also made up of units. What are the units of Shavuos? Weeks. And therefore, how do you sanctify the Yom Tov of Shavuos? By sanctifying a unit, sanctifying a week. So from here you see that even though the observance of the Yom Tov is only for a day, there's a quasi-observance, a carbonic observance that extends for a week. So the Gemara says, 1 second, Ema Atzeres Chada Yoma, but I don't understand. Why don't you just say that by Shavuos it's also for a day? Because we'll say, well, it's true that Sheva Shabbosos Tamimos, but what else does the Torah say by Shavuos? Tisperu Chamishim Yom. Right? Shavuos is not just tracked by weeks, it's also tracked by days. So how do you know you sanctify a week? Maybe you sanctify a day. And that's it. Amar Rava, Atu Atzeres Yomi Maninon, Shavuos Lo Maninon. But again, Rava said, but 1 second, you know that it's not enough just to count Shavuos by days. You have to count Shavuos by weeks as well. The Amar Mar, Mitzvah Lemimne Yomei, Umitzvah Lemimne Shavuos. There is a mitzvah to count days. There's a mitzvah to count days, and there's a mitzvah to count weeks. Va'od, furthermore, Chag Shavuos Ksiv. They both say this is incredible. What's the name of the Yom Tov? Right? The festival of weeks. So therefore, again, Abba say this is the approach of the Tanna Kameh. Now, what I want to point out is no one's arguing on the bottom line. The bottom line is that, interestingly enough, the 1 day Yom Tov has a week of Tashlumin. The Shaila just is where we're learning that out from. So the first opinion will say we're learning it out from the comparison to the Yom Tov of Pesach, because all the Yom Tovim are mentioned in one pasuk together. Just like Pesach has 7 days of Tashlumin, so too the Shavuos has 7 days of Tashlumin. The Tanna Kameh, Reb Shimon are going to say no. We learn it out because it's called Chag Shavuos, and since the Yom Tov is counted by units of weeks, yes, in addition to units of days, but clearly the primary identity of, or the primary unit is weeks. V'haraya, the name of the Yom Tov is Shavuos. So just like Rosh Chodesh is made up of units and you sanctify one unit, so too Shavuos is made up of units. You sanctify one unit, which is a week, which tells you that you have a week of Tashlumin from the Yom Tov. Beautiful. So we'll say that concludes that sugya. We'll say now what the Gemara is going to go back and do is dissect the Brisa a little bit. So remember again, on the bottom of Daled Amud Aleph onto Daled Amud Beis, the Brisa spoke about all of the different things that are subject to the prohibition of Baal Ta'acher. So we're going to go through that list now, and the Gemara is going to question that. Amongst that list, the Gemara said, Pesach, right? Pesach, the Gemara, so the Brisa, with the way the Brisa read was as follows, that if you don't bring your carbon Pesach within 3 regalim, you're over on Baal Ta'acher. The Gemara says, what? Pesach bar mikra b'regalimu? Both say, you can only bring your carbon Pesach when? On Pesach. Right, Erev Pesach, right? There's no, Rashi says over Pesach bar mikra v'regalimu to kamar leitana lehel bebal ta'achar the shalosh regalim for any yochalak v'yuba elabiyah dalabed Nisan. There's only one time to bring Karban Pesach on the 14th of Nisan. So what are you talking about Karban Pesach and the subject of Baal Ta'acher? The Gemara says Pesach zimna kaviyale I akreve vilo akreve itchile. Now, both say there are certain things in life where there's a makeup date. And there are certain things in life where if you miss the opportunity is done. Karban Pesach is one of the latter. At the end of the day, you have a window. The window is the 14th of Nisan. You offer it up on the 14th of Nisan. Great. You don't. You're done. There's no Baal Ta'acher because at the end of the day, there's no prolonged window. What are you talking about? Someone of Chisda, no. Pesach Kidei Nasva. So it's very interesting. So Rav Chisda says, the truth is you're right. The Tana just got a little carried away. You know how it is. When you start talking about karbanos, like you can't stop, right? So it says, Ola Shlomim, everything starts flowing. Pesach this, but he didn't really mean Pesach, which is an interesting answer. He didn't really mean Pesach. He just got kind of caught up in the energy of the carbonic moment, and Pesach just slipped out. But he didn't actually mean it. Okay, so the Gemara Rav Sheshet Samar, no, I don't like that answer. I don't like that answer. Rather, my Pesach, Shalmei Pesach. Oh, Pesach, Rabosai, doesn't mean Karban Pesach. Remember, on Pesach, there are many other karbanos that are brought. What are Shalmei Pesach? Shalmei Pesach are Shalmei Chagiga, right? Remember again, we're going to come to the Beis HaMikdash and Meretz Hashem B'Karav on Yom Tiv. And if it's Pesach, for argument's sake, if it's Pesach, you're going to shech your Karban Pesach on Erev Yom Tiv. But there's also other karbanos like Shamei Chagiga. Shamei Chagiga is how you would have meat on Yom Tiv when you were in Yerushalayim. You would offer up a carbon shlamim, right? Part of it goes on the Mizbeach, part of it goes to the Kohanim, a large part of it goes to me, the Yisrael owner, and that's how I eat meat over Pesach. Oh, that's what it's talking about. The Brayso is talking about a case where you neglected to offer up your Shamei Chagiga, right? Or Olas, you forgot to offer up your other Yom Tov associated karbanos on Pesach. So Pesach doesn't mean Karban Pesach. Pesach means other Pesach Yomim Tovim karbanos. So the Gemara says, Ihachi Hainu Shlamim. So that's fine, but the Brayso said Shlamim. That's the same case. Right? We'll say Shamei Chagiga are Shlamim. So the Brayso said, if you neglected to offer up your carbon Shlamim, you have whatever amount of time you have until you're in violation of Baal Ta'acher. So why the need to mention Pesach? I'll tell you why. Tana Shlamim Habai Machmas Pesach. The Tana Shlamim Habaim Machmas Atzman. To which the Gemara says as follows. To which the Gemara will say, by the way, Rashi just points out over here something very interesting. Rashi says, what's the case where you didn't offer up your Shalmei Chagiga of Pesach on Pesach? See, he gives an interesting case. We'll see why he interprets it this way. Rashi says, if you take a look at last Rashi, now Shalmei Pesach, B'shelo Karav Bizmano, Sha'avad B'niskaper Ba'acher. Hu na'aseh shlamim, hu na'aseh shlamim. We'll say, so Rashi says, what's the case? The case is it's Pesach. I have an animal set aside for my Shalmei Chagiga. Then what happens? It runs away. I lost it. I replace it with another animal, offer up that Shalmei Chagiga, and lo and behold, what happens afterwards? I find it. What's the status of the animal? That animal is a carbon shlamim. So we'll say, the Gemara asks, okay, if it's a shlamim, you already have another, shlamim is already explicitly mentioned in the Brayso. Why the need to mention both? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. We have to mention shlamim from Pesach and regular shlamim for the following reasons. You would have thought, Hoil umachmas Pesach ka'asu amadeis ki Pesach damu. So I might have thought as follows. I might have thought that any carbon that is associated with the Yom Tov of Pesach kind of is linked to the halachos of carbon Pesach. And I both say, what happens if you have an animal set aside for carbon Pesach that you did not offer on Pesach itself? So it's subject to Baal Ta'acher immediately after Yom Tov of Pesach. I might have thought that the shlamim of Pesach should also be in violation of Baal Ta'acher immediately after the Yom Tov of Pesach. Kamash Malon not. Kamash Malon, that if you have shlamim of the Yom Tov of Pesach left over, you didn't offer it up on Pesach for whatever the reason, halacha l'maisa, they're treated like regular shlamim and only become subject to Baal Ta'acher after some later time, depending on our 5-way machlokes. Good. So the Gemara says, Mili. From where do we know this? So interestingly enough, the Brayso listed an exhaustive list of items that are subject to Baal Ta'acher, right? So it was. Most remember again. We'll go through the list very quickly. Damin, a person pledges their value ultimately to the Beis HaMikdash. Erchin, which is erech vows. Charamim, make something cherim, you give it to the Beis HaMikdash. Hekdeshos, hekdish. Chataos, ashamos, olos, shlamim. Tzedakos, which are tzedakah vows. Maisros, bechar. Meiser, Pesach, Leket, Shechacha, and Peah. Very long list. All of these items, if you fail to bring them, to give them in a timely manner, you are in violation of Baal Ta'acher. The Gemara says, how do you know that? How do you know? Both say, and the reason we're going to ask that is because we're going to see that the prohibition of Baal Ta'acher was stated in a very specific context, namely neder. The Torah says this is in Devarim Chaf Gimel Chaf Beis. If you have the psukim on the side of your Gemara, you're going to see it. Ki stidar neder l'Hashem Elokecha lo sacher l'shamo. If you make a neder, don't delay in giving your neder. So let's go through this. So how do I know that all of these items mentioned in the Brayso are actually subject to the prohibition of Baal Ta'acher? The Tan Rabbanon, here we go. Ki sidar neder. When you'll make a neder, Torah says, do not delay in fulfilling your neder. Ainli el neder. I only know a neder. Nidava minayin. How do I know that it even applies to a nidava? So say, remember again, two different offerings. Neder is a vow. Nidava is just a voluntary offering. Salacha lemaisa, I only know that a neder is subject to Baal Ta'acher. How do I know that a nidava is as well? Ne'emar kan neder, v'ne'emar lehalon im neder o nidava. Because we'll say it says neder over here, but in a different pasuk it says, right, im neder o nidava karbano, right? Ultimately, that's talking about nosar. So it links neder and nidava. Ma lehalon nidava imo, just like in a second context, nidava is mentioned together with neder. Afkan nidava imo. So too over here, when it says neder, we understand that neder and nidava are linked together, which I will say is a limud we find very often. Neder and nidava are often concepts that are always linked together. So as soon as we find that linkage in one place, the Gemara says we assume that linkage applies in other situations as well. La Hashem Elokecha, the pasuk says to Hashem your God. So I remember all of this is the drasha of the pasuk Dvarim Chaf Gimel Chaf Beis. Ki sidar neder la Hashem Elokecha lo sa'acher l'shalmo. When you make a neder to Hashem your God, do not delay in giving it. So that's the pasuk about ta'acher. Baal ta'acher lo sa'acher, do not delay. So we're darshing that pasuk. Next, la Hashem Elokecha. When it said to Hashem your God, what does that refer to? Elu hadamin ha'erchen hacharamin v'ha'ekdeshos. This refers to say if a person goes ahead and pledges his value, that's damin. Erchen means your erech value, which is an objective value in halacha. Charamim, which are the chayrim amounts, right? The person makes a chayrim to the Beis Hamikdash, and hekdeshos, making something hekdish. So we'll say La Hashem Elokecha includes all of these items that they are subject to Baal Ta'acher. Lo sa'acher l'shamo, do not delay in paying that. Hu v'lo chilufa. So we'll discuss what that means. That the prohibition of Baal Ta'acher only applies to the item itself and not to something for which you exchange it. Now we'll see exactly what that means in the Gemara a little bit later. Ki darosh yidrashenu, because the Chosh Baruch Hu says, I will seek it out from you. What does that refer to? Elu chataos ashamos, olos, ushlamim. That refers ultimately again to all of these psukim. I both say, how does that now? Ki darosh yidrashenu. That refers to the items that you're obligated to bring. So achatas and asham and all the shlamim referring to obligatory offerings. Hashem Elokecha, Hashem your God. Elu tzedakos umaistros ubachar. This refers ultimately again tzedakos, which is the tzedakah vow, maestros, and your bachar offering. Again, we'll discuss exactly what that means as well. So the pasuk says, me'imach, from you, zeleket shikhacha upeya. That refers ultimately again to leket shikha and peah. So we'll say, remember again, leket shikha peah, interestingly enough, is in a different category. Because, right, remember again, leket shikha and peah refers to agricultural items, or right? Remember again, shikha you leave behind the bundle, peah you have to leave behind the corner, leket you drop individual stalks. So remember again, who do these belong to? These belong to the aniyim, to the poor. But even when it comes to everything else up until now has really been dealing, not everything, true, this bachar is also to the kohen, not to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Lamais, it's saying that Baal Ta'acher applies even to other charitable commitments. Where do I learn that? Mi'imach, from the things that have to come from you. Tzara first, like a shikha and peah. Shabbos says, interestingly enough, which is really quite fascinating, the Gemara just darshaned all the items in the Brisa from the pasuk of Baal Ta'acher. Quite amazing. Rashi elaborates on the drashas a bit more. How exactly? You see the drashas, but for our purposes, this is sufficient. Vayabachachet. So we'll say this is incredible. How does the pasuk end? Vayabachachet. Now, what does that mean? Vayabachachet, that there will be sin in you. What that means is, if you fail to offer up or to give your karbanos or your other obligations in a timely fashion, vayabachachet, you will be in violation of Baal Ta'acher. So we'll say the Gemara makes an amazing drasha. V'haya b'cha chet v'lo b'karbancha chet. Interestingly enough, what does it mean? It means you will be in violation, but not your karban. Now we'll say, now what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. V'lo b'karbancha chet in a karban nifsal l'kach. Now we'll say, very interesting. Even once you violate Baal Ta'acher, the karban is not invalid. For example, I was supposed to bring a chatas, right? I accidentally violated Shabbos, chas v'shalom. I was supposed to bring a karban chatas. I'm supposed to bring it, let's just go with the simple approach to Tanakama. I have 3 regalim in order to bring my karban chatas. And what happens? I didn't. I didn't. For whatever the reason, I did not get my carbon chatas done in time. So we'll say, what's now my status? What's my status? What's my status? I'm in violation of Baal Ta'acher. What's the status of the carbon? Totally fine. In other words, I still have to bring it, and the carbon itself is not invalidated as a result of the prohibition of Baal Ta'acher. So we'll say, actually, this is is actually an incredibly profound idea in this statement. I will say, if you take a look at the words, V'haya b'cha chet v'lo b'karbancha chet. What's the Musar Haskell? Even in life, when it's haya b'cha chet, right? Even at the end of the day, when I am, chet doesn't really mean sin. Chet really means deficient. Chet means a void or an absence. Even in life where it's haya b'cha chet, that I am in a state of absence, I am in a state of sin, lo b'karbancha chet. Never think that your ability to come karov, karbancha, karov, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, never think that that is deficient or lacking. See, I say sometimes in life, it's haya b'cha chet. I'm not in a good place. I'm just not in a good place. I'm not living the way I'm supposed to live. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. And I know it. I know that I'm just not where I need to be. And sometimes when it's v'haya b'cha chet, we view ourselves as damaged goods and therefore unable to come close to HaKodesh Baruch Hu. But the Gemara says that's not true. Even when it's v'haya b'cha chet, even when you're in a state of chet, below b'karban chet, the ability to be a carbon, the ability to come karov, the ability to go ahead and establish a closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is independent of where you're holding in life. The Rebbe Shalom makes no restrictions on coming close to Him. He doesn't say you have to be holy. He doesn't say you have to be good. He doesn't say you have to be in a good place in life. Wherever you are, the ability to be a carbon, wherever you are, the ability to be karov always exists. Such an incredible mantra. V'haya b'cha chet, even if that's true, ein b'karban chachet. The ability to become karov is never absent, never lacking, and never deficient. Such a yesod. Amar Mar, lo sa'acher l'shama hu v'lo chilufav. So let's analyze this next statement. We said, the pasuk says, do not delay in going ahead and l'shamo, and literally paying your debt, your carbonic debt. Hu v'lo chilufav. It only applies to the carbon itself, but not to what it's exchanged for. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Chilufe mai. Exchange. What's been exchanged? Ichilufe ola ushlamim mikra v'krivi. So we'll say, let's analyze this. If you're talking about the following situation, I will say, now Rashi explains this case the way we explained the shlama on Pesach and Amar Aleph. So if you're talking about a case where I had an ola or a shlamim, right? I had an ola or a shlamim. And then what happens? And then let's say I lost the carbon, replaced it with another, and then found the original one. We'll say, what's the halacha of a lost ola and shlamim that were then found? What's their status? They're shlamim, right? They're shlamim or ola, right? In other words, you could offer it up. If you're talking about the exchange of a chatos, that what happened over here? I had a carbon chatos, I lost my chatos, got a new chatos, then found the first chatos. So we'll say, what happens to that first chatos? What happens? It's left to die, right? That's one of those strange cases where the carbon, essentially, the animal is just locked up and left to die. So when we talk about a case of an exchange or an exchange, but I want to point out, when we normally talk about exchange, you think about tamura. Over here, again, it's not a tamura case. This is a case where I had an animal, lost the animal, replaced the animal, and found the original animal. So what's the case? Chilufe toda. It's a case of, I'll say, of a carbon toda. So what happened over here? Again, I will say, the case is very simple. Halacha l'maisa, I had a carbon toda, lost my carbon toda, found a new carbon toda, and then what happens? Rashi says, chilufe toda, ukigon shenis arba barishona. The two carbonos get mixed up with each other. So I will say, now watch this. Now, what's unique about a carbon toda? This is very interesting. So the Gemara said, the Tani Rabbi Chia, toda shenis arba bitmurasa. If a toda gets mixed up with its replacement animal, umeisa achas mehen, and one of them died, right? One of them died. So we'll say, so now what happens? Now one of them died, but what's the problem? What's the problem? You don't know which animal died, right? What was it? The original toda? Was it the tmura animal? So what happens? Chavirasa in la takana. the leftover toda, there's nothing to do with it. Why? Heichi li'avid. What should we do? Likrava. So you'll say, we'll just offer it up. Well, here's the problem. A carbon toda comes with what? 40 loaves. 40 loaves. So likrava, v'likrav lechem b'hada. So if you say offer it up and offer the bread with it, you can't do that. Why? Dilma tmurahi. Because maybe that's not the real toda. And I will say, the problem with bringing loaves, if you remember, I will say, you can't bring unconsecrated things that don't belong as part of the sacrificial service. That's called being makdish chulin ba'azara, which carries a little thing called misa along with it. So if you don't know definitively that this is the carbon toda, you cannot bring the loaves along with it. So therefore, again, I could offer it up, but I can't bring the loaves. Well, if you can't bring the loaves, that's not a carbon toda. So the Gemara says, likrava below lechem. So you'll say, fine, offer it up without the lechem. Dilma todahu. Perhaps it's the toda, and you can't offer up a toda, and you can't bring a toda without carbon, without bread. So we just have a catch-22 over here. On one hand, I can't bring the bread because I don't know definitively that this is the carbon toda. I can't offer it up without the bread because then it's a deficient toda. So what should I do? So the Gemara says, so again, why do I need a pasuk to exclude this case? It's obvious that you can't offer it up. And I was about to say, it is obvious that you can't offer up this carbon. There is nothing to do about this carbon. Remember again, the toda and its tamura gets mixed up together. One of them dies. I don't know which one died and which one is alive. The Gemara simply says, there is no takana for the leftover animal, simply because I don't know what to do with the bread, and there is no carbon toda without the bread. Therefore, you can't offer it up. So the Gemara says, if you can't offer it up, why do I need a pasuk to exclude that case? To which the Gemara says, you're right. The pasuk is coming to exclude the exchange for Ola and Shlamim. But I will say, we just said before that the exchange for Ola and Shlamim has the status of Ola and Shlamim. So what do I need? Let me the Gemara says, what's the case? Listen to this. Kigon sha'avru alav shnei regalim v'humam v'chilalu al acher. I will say, this is fascinating. Listen to this case. Let's say you have a shlamim. And what happens? Two regalim passed by. So you say to yourself, no problem. I still have what? A third regal. No problem. After the second regal, your shlamim develops a mum. Now it can't be offered. Still not a problem. What do? You go ahead and redeem it, right? Purchase a new animal that you're going to use as shlamim. But say, listen to this shaila. Sagadait chamina, I would have thought, hoel umikoach kamai kaasi kiman da'avru alav gimel regalim dami. Rabbi say, listen to this fascinating case. See, here you go. We have a shlamim now that went past two regalim and now again develops a mum. I need to redeem it. I redeem it. No, not a problem. Happens all the time. Transfer the sanctity, buy a new animal, have a new shlamim. But let's say, here's the shaila. When does the clock for Baal Ta'acher begin with this new shlamim? Isn't that fascinating, shaila? So I would have assumed that when does the clock start? From shlamim number 1. Because at the end of the day, shlamim number 2 is not really a brand new independent shlamim. What is shlamim number 2? What is it? It's really a replacement for shlamim number 1. Therefore, it should be governed by the clock, the Baal Ta'acher clock of number 1. Kamashmala, no. Incredible. Kamashmala, no. That amazingly enough, when you go ahead and now you have that new replacement shlamim, the Baal Ta'acher clock is restarted. Pretty incredible. Ul Rabbi Meir, Damar Kevan Sha'abar Lav Regel Echad over Baal Ta'acher, Ma'ika Lememar. But according to Rabbi Meir, who says that once you go ahead and one regel passes, you're in violation of Baal Ta'acher, what is there to say? Amarava, Hacham asking on what's the case? Kigon Shumam Besocha Regel. Oh, the case according to Meir is what? Where the animal, the shlamim, developed a mum during Yom Tiv, v'chilalo, and then you go ahead and you redeem it, but you didn't offer it. And now va'avra alava regel, and that Yom Tiv passes, you would have thought what? Sagadait chamina hoil mikoach kama kaasi. You might have thought that since the second carbon is a replacement for the first, therefore it's covered by the Baal Ta'acher clock of the first. The avra kulei regel dami kamashmala. No. So we'll say the bottom line, according to both opinions, although the manifestation of it is different, is that Allah Chalamai said this is really fascinating. Whatever you hold the Baal Ta'acher clock is, if for some reason your animal is maimed, it has a mum, and therefore you have to replace it, right? You replace it with a new animal. the Baal Ta'achar clock is reset from the time that the new animal is inaugurated as the replacement carbon. You might have thought the Havamina was that Allah Lamaisa, the Baal Ta'achar clock of the replacement animal, should really be governed by the original animal, since the replacement is a replacement of the original one. Kamash Malon, that if you have to replace the animal because of legitimate purposes, like a mum, halacha lemaisa, the Baal Ta'achar clock is restarted with the new animal. So we'll stop over here. We'll continue with the analysis of the Brisa tomorrow.